So I'm going to be talking about online servers and digital games, how alike we really are as two interactive platforms, and how we as researchers can harness a gamer style of engagement for better data quality. And actually a lot of what I'm going through today will echo some of what we've heard before. To quote John Kieran from Brain Juice earlier, how people feel is the best indicator of what they'll do. And he spoke about driving emotion, and that's what games can do in surveys. And obviously Tom spoke about the impact of time and effort from the respondents and giving them feedback. And so all of these mechanisms come into play very naturally as part of using games in research. So the first question I'd like to put forward is, well, why games? And just to make sure that I can actually click through these slides, I'm very sorry to stall here. Right, okay, so we're working, right? So the first question I'm going to put forward is why games? So I'm going to be, throughout this talk, giving you an answer to some questions that you haven't asked yet, but perhaps should be asking. So why in the market research industry have we been talking about using game mechanics, game-like thinking, game for design, and why recently? Why, for example, aren't we talking about borrowing mechanics from film or music? Why aren't we talking about filmification or musification? Why games? It's no secret that the market research industry has been experiencing some issues with engagement in the past, and in most modes of research. But due to that lack of engagement, this has had a knock-on effect on response rates, dropout rates, and overall data quality. But games, you see, are the most engaging medium of all time. And in one platform, oh, sorry, I've gone too far ahead here. In one platform, humans can gain social interaction through games, learn through play and challenge, achieve and reach goals. Games are no longer being ignored by the corporate world. The UK video games industry is larger than its music and film industry combined. The video games industry is worth $100 billion worldwide as of 2010, and of course that's growing 4 years later. Even a whole new industry popped up about 4 years ago. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of it, called the gamification industry. But of course this industry is global, the gamification industry. It's got its own conferences, books and businesses for the purpose of trying to harness the great things that games can and have achieved. Of course, what is it that games can and have achieved? It's that the highest levels of engagement of any medium of all time. And it's that keyword engagement which is what's interesting to you and me as researchers. Now, on the surface of it, digital games and online surveys are hugely very different, and so it leads us to think that perhaps this is a bit of a strange combination. But actually, the digital games and online surveys are much more similar than you could have ever imagined. You see, game designers and market researchers face the same challenges for both their platforms in terms of design, development, and execution. Neither platform, neither the digital game platform or the online survey platform can survive without the engagement of its participants. Here is Ian Bogost, game designer, author, conference speaker. And here is Lee Caldwell, research designer, author, conference speaker. And you can bet your bottom dollar that they face the same obstacles to overcome with the interactive platforms they send out to people they want to engage. And also, it's no coincidence that I chose photographs of two designers that look quite similar. They obviously both have long hair and beards, so there's that as well. But actually, if we look beyond the stereotypes that people put forward about game designers and market researchers, what we normally think about these people, and break down the values and needs that both these people have and the work that they do, we start to see that the game designer, the digital game designer and the online survey designer are not so different after all. And to keep this fair, when I Googled market researcher and game designer, I used the first image that came up on Google Image there. You can see from the slide there that the market researcher typically has a clipboard, and the game designer seems to be so animated that the first image of them on Google is not even real. But of course, yes, if we get past those stereotypes, we see that aside from maybe one or two crucial elements that I'll come to later, we are very similar indeed as to platforms. So what else is similar between digital games and online surveys? Well, we measure participant engagement in near accurate ways. We both collect paradata and metadata from our participants through the platforms that we use. Both platforms are made to be completed. The designers have the same fears about engagement levels and, will people complete this thing that I've given them, the digital game, the online survey? Will this get the right amount of engagement? And the designers for the digital games and online surveys also, of course, rely massively on participant engagement for survival, growth and differentiation in our respective saturated and competitive markets. And those competitive markets, of course, drive how we price, if at all. The digital games industry, the online survey industry is going through the same things economically. And both mediums also rely increasingly on panels of participants. So for instance, a company like Research Now, of course, has a panel. You've got Insights Consulting, who was talking earlier, Tom DeRook, they've got a community. And PSN, the PlayStation Network, of course, also has a community as well of players. Now, we're getting to the nitty-gritty now. Digital games ask people to do repetitive, rudimentary, and sometimes more advanced cognitive tasks. So do online surveys. Now, in fact, such are the high levels of similarities between the digital game and the online survey that I've actively sought out other platforms that could compare to the online survey just to play devil's advocate as part of my PhD work. But time and time again, the digital game is coming up as the thing that is most similar to the online survey. However, the differences are also, the similarities are also very similar in terms of the challenges that we face. So as two platforms, the digital game and the online survey platform, we both face very similar technological, economic, creative and time-related challenges. Technological, well, there's a multitude of devices out there to use, each coming with its own obstacles. So for example, do I create my digital game? Do I create my online survey on tablets, iPhones and Androids? What about old browser versions? What about IE? And economic challenges. Well, how much will those, will deploying my online survey or digital game cost me if I put it and make it available for tablet and different kind of mobile devices? And how much will the engagement cost me? So in terms of the design, how much money can I plummet into the design to get that engagement back? And will that have a tangible, financially quantifiable outcome? And in terms of the creative constraints, well, game designers and online survey designers have to make sacrifices sorry, I've lost my words here, in order to satisfy stakeholders, and those stakeholders might be the client, might be the respondent, and it's a constant balancing act with the creativity in mind with the fact that we've got these technological and economic constraints. And in terms of time, as we know very well as market researchers, everything needs to be done yesterday. Now, of course, in the digital game world, people are given more time, obviously, to execute, but there are still massive, massive time constraints. But what are those crucial differences between these two mediums that I just mentioned earlier that I would come to? Well, those differences come back to engagement. The differences that participants have between their experience with online surveys and how players have their experience with digital games is massively, massively different. So sadly, all those rich array of similarities start to come to an end when we look at the difference of engagement levels. And those differences have created a culture around games. So such is the high levels of engagement in digital games that games have a culture. Games have an entirely player-made culture as well. Pardon me. And such are those high levels of engagement where players have created a culture, an architecture around the game, that of course the games industry has created its own culture as well to perpetuate and spur that existing engagement and fandom that players have in games. Now, the engagement that players experience in a game is so high that they are happy to read reams and reams of text on a screen. Now, of course, this is pretty juxtaposed with our idea that research respondents would be unwilling to read large amounts of text on a screen. What you see here is a genuine sequence from a game called Ghost Trick by a company called Capcom, most famously for developing a game called Street Fighter. When players are engaged, not only is there seemingly no limits to how much they will read, there's also seemingly no limits to how much they will write. There are plenty of CRPGs, computer role-playing games out there where players are asked to respond to the game via writing text. But outside of the game confine, players are also writing huge amounts of text by producing game-based wikis. The World of Warcraft wiki has been entirely voluntarily built by players. At the time of producing these slides, it had 102,084 pages. All of that made voluntarily by players, by people passionate and engaged about this game. But it's not just reading and writing that seems potentially unlimited to an engaged player, but also, and crucially, how much they will create. Take a look at these forms of fan art. Just a drop in the ocean of the gigabytes of data produced by fans, players who have become fans clearly around the world. And the amount of effort they put into this fan art is absolutely wonderful. And again, this is just a small amount of fan art that's on the internet today, and even some fan art makes its way to exhibitions. There's also cosplay, costume role play, in which men and women will go to events, or typically in Japan just walk out in the street wearing the clothing of their favourite game characters. And so it's not just unlimited to how much engaged players will read and write and how much they create, but also how much they will listen. Conversations between some NPCs, non-player characters in some games, can go on seemingly forever. In games like GTA 5, Grand Theft Auto 5, some cutscenes include quite lengthy conversations, which are more like movies than games, like the conversations that might take place between the characters Michael, Franklin and Trevor in Grand Theft Auto 5, which I'm sure many people on our audience are familiar with. But there's even more scope to how much more players will read. So even outside of the game, there's games magazines and console-specific magazines, and they're part of the video game culture. They're part of the digital game culture. And of course, you know, it's fair to say that these aren't free. So such is, again, is the high engagement of game players that they are willing to spend more money, more than what they spent on a console or game paraphernalia, but to engage with the industry at large. It's a great thing for a player to be able to know the who's who, the developers, the people that create the music in some of their favourite games. Even highbrow newspapers, like the Guardian newspaper in the UK, have stopped to take notice of the digital games industry, where they've dedicated a game column to game reviews every single day in their online newspaper. And obviously this screenshot is just from their Thursday one, but it's available every day if anybody was interested in having a look. But it doesn't stop there. There's thousands and thousands of blogs dedicated to games culture, digital games, like GameSkilly and more famously Kotaku as well. If any of you want to have a look at those, it's a great insight into the games industry. But there are seemingly no limitations to how much players will also watch. Sites like YouTube Gaming and Twitch now allow players to easily watch other people play games, of which the top Twitch member has almost 4 million followers as he's playing games like Minecraft and League of Legends. I was very lucky enough to go to the UK video games industry about a month ago as part of my PhD, and one of the speakers there was Mark Green, Research Director at Creative Development Group at Sony, who said that watching people play video games is now more than ever a form of entertainment in itself. Last year, the League of Legends game Season 3 World Championship was broadcast over Twitch's live stream on October the 4th, and it was watched by 32 million people, 8.5 million of whom were watching at the same time. So you might think, okay, this is maybe a pretty special type of engagement in this case. League of Legends, for any of you who aren't familiar with the game, it's a game that has been around for 5 years. So you might think, okay, a game that's been around for that long, people might have had a chance to build a relationship with the game and the brand and yada, yada, yada. But what about an entirely new game from an entirely new company that nobody knows? What kind of engagement do we see between the player and the digital game in that sense? Meet Ramel Romero. This is the community manager for indie games company Minority Media, based in Montreal. Minority Media made a very famous game called Papo and Yo, an empathy game, and arguably the first ever empathy game of its type. I interviewed Ramel just a few months ago so he could talk to me about how a games company like Minority Media measure and quantify user engagement and what kind of player engagement they've experienced. And I was doing this as part of my PhD research, so I'm very happy that I can share this with you here. And what Ramel told me is that in the game Papo and Yo, which was their debut game, as I mentioned, their first ever game that they had produced, they had people hunt down bugs and offer to fix them for free. These are developers, these are programmers who get paid quite a lot of money, who loved the game so much that they were saying to Minority Media, hey, I actively searched in your game to see if there were any bugs, and I found some, and I want to fix them for you for free. There were also people that were handwriting letters to them to say how much they enjoyed the game, how wonderful they felt the graphics were, how it made them feel, the emotional impact that it had. They've also had people were offered to work for them for free. They're sending in, drawings and ideas for new game characters and suggestions on how to make the game even better. That constructive criticism. And their players engage with Minority Media every single game, every single day on social media. But again, you might think, okay, maybe this kind of crazy levels of engagement is another anomaly. After all, this game was built as an empathy game, so it's meant to be emotional. But you couldn't be more wrong. Just last week, I had interviewed author and professor at Bath Spa University, James Newman, who is a games and media professor. And he gave me even more insight into player engagement than what I had already uncovered in his very well-written book, Playing with Video Games. James said that the kind of engagement that I've already touched upon is apparent in hundreds of thousands of games around the world, equating to hundreds and thousands of hours of free, voluntary work done by players, providing that the format that they engaged with was compelling. And he made it clear to me that that is key. You cannot get these people to do this free voluntary stuff in which they put their heart and soul into the listening and the creating and the collaborating if it's not engaging in the first place. And he gave me some more examples, and we had a nice discussion on the phone in which you of course see lots of fan art with TV shows like Twin Peaks, which hasn't been on TV for 25 years. People are still making fan art about Twin Peaks to this day, and other kind of TV shows like Breaking Bad. So the engagement is not just confined to games, but also other kinds of media as well, but unfortunately not in market research. So in summary, what James Newman was telling me, what I'm listening to at these games conferences, what I'm reading about in games and interviewing people like Ramel Romero, is that when people engage, there are no limits. They will read, how much they will write, and how honest they will be. That's very crucial. There are also no limits on how much people are willing to help, share ideas, create, co-create, and collaborate. And suddenly, when we start listening to these kind of words, they become familiar to us as researchers, don't they? Because we often talk about collaboration, co-creation. We want people to create and work with us as researchers. In essence, they're a kind of extended part of our team. Now, if you don't believe me, check out this completely voluntarily written blog, which was written by well-known games journalist H.C. Billings after playing a research game that we made for the Campbell Soup Company a couple of years ago now. And so what was interesting is that, of course, as many of you know, I make games for research. And so here I am incorporating games into something that usually is not ever associated with games to see what kind of engagement we could drive and what kind of results we could have. And so here is H.C. Billings, well-known games blogger who blogged on Game Skinny, a journalist on Game Skinny, and here she is saying that she could not possibly be more thrilled to find similar game-based research opportunities in her email inbox in the future. Now, of course, that was really flattering to me as an individual, as someone who makes games for research, but it also made me so positive about the kind of impact all of us researchers could have if we all start imbuing game-like thinking into our research. And so we're turning that perception around, aren't we? We're going from respondents who almost fear those surveys coming to their inbox and they feel that it's a chore. Now we're getting people like H.C. Billings saying, I can't wait to see this come into my inbox in the future. So they're starting to look forward to it, which is fantastic. But let's dig deeper. What is at the root of games that have created the world, have taken the world by storm? What is it exactly that create these high levels of engagement? It's MAP. It's mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And mastery, autonomy and purpose, if any of you have listened to the talks by Daniel Pink, you will understand that these three components are at the roots of creating great performances in the workplace, of creating happiness. People need mastery, autonomy and purpose. And that's also been evidenced with over 40 years of study by researchers around the world, you know, from MIT and Brunel and Oxford University. So you might think, well, how do I provide mastery, autonomy and purpose to get that gamer style of engagement? Well, you have to include game mechanics, goals, rules, a feedback system and a voluntary approach. And the voluntary approach part, you might think, oh, that's a bit questionable because we normally incentivize our respondents. But John Paulston at GMI Interactive has created gamified surveys in some of his experiments and hasn't given an incentive to his participants because the reward was in the participation itself. And he has achieved some really enviable results. So a voluntary approach is possible providing that the users have a goal, rules and a feedback system to understand their contribution. So you might think about how can I achieve all this with just text on a screen, you know, given the budgetary constraints and time constraints and technological constraints we talked about earlier. I'm about to show you two screenshots as part of my wrap-up to help you understand how you can achieve this. This is a game I'm showing you on the screen. This is a screenshot from the Zork series that was out in the 1980s. And it is a game because it has got goals, rules and a feedback system and a voluntary approach. But you can see that the human to computer interaction is just the same as our online surveys. I have been given something to do, a question to answer, a thing to do, and as the human, I'm inputting via text from my PC or laptop something that helps me continue. And so that's a really great example of a game that can be made on a shoestring. Swapping it on its head, here's a game created by a Russian artist who's created a game using our survey software. Grids, tick boxes, sliders and all sorts. Never has a grid box been so engaging before. And so a part of Research for Gaming, we've taken on game mechanics in research, and I just want to give you some highlights of the kind of results we've had. So we've had more completes we've needed in less than half the time, even for some notoriously hard to reach respondents aged 7 to 10 years old. That was done for a study we did with BBC Magazines a couple of years ago now, and the client of course was absolutely thrilled, not just at the level of completes, but of course the time and money saved in field, because we had an extra week left in field and we didn't need it. Some other results that have been had is decreased straight lining, increased answer time, enviable recall rates, positive feedback from participants, lower dropout rates, and voluntarily people giving their time for collaboration and co-creation. And so we don't have a market research culture yet like the games industry does, but we are going towards that, especially as more researchers are experimenting with game design, game thinking, game mechanics, and we're seeing that actually there's lots of ways by using that money and time can be saved, and we're getting great data quality as well. So let's all join forces much more with the digital games industry, understand how alike we really are, not just through these talks, but more reading, writing and listening, and we can get started on even more on this exciting journey together. Thank you.